I'm always curious to see when we rule in favor of censorship, under what reasons and why. To me, I think this is a major loss for American citizens.
Interest rates are high, housing prices are high. I think the average American thinks that, interest rates are going to come down, which means housing.
He said Donald Trump is going to get us into all these wars, and yet he now has the track record of doing these things. What's his explanation for that?
Interest rates go down, prices go up. What the hell is the end of this? This is insane.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the King's Table podcast. I'm back here with my buddies. You guys are going to love the episode that we just finished recording. We spent a lot of time going into the breaking news of the Supreme Court censorship on social media. We're going to talk about our predictions of the presidential debate, which that's actually coming out before you hear it. So it might be fun to go back and hear what we thought was going to happen. New home sales down 11%. We're all making predictions on what we think that means with future mortgage rates and Fed cut rates. But be sure to stay out of the end. Our most exciting part, and maybe where we laughed the most, was the 7'3" Chinese basketball player that makes it look like I'm playing basketball against kindergartners. So thanks for listening, and I hope you love this episode.
All right, guys, here we go. First issue on the docket, the Supreme Court backs censorship of misinformation. What you guys giggling for? Here we go. Lots of stuff to talk about today. This is fresh off the docket. Bloomberg, CNN, everyone's reporting on this. This is coming in fresh off the press. The Supreme Court backs White House on social media post removal, basically giving the White House the ability to censor social media content and letting the social media companies basically do whatever they want, more specifically about misinformation, election interference from other countries, things like that. This was definitely a hot topic in the 2020 election, specifically about how not only the government and the FBI was pressuring social media companies to sort of clock virality of some of the Biden laptop case issues, but also just within Twitter itself. The Twitter files were showing that internal administration within the company itself, they wanted to clock that stuff too. But basically, the government is giving the White House the authority to do it, and they're continuing to do it. You guys, what do you think about this? Should we be concerned about this? Is this a infringement on free speech? Do we want the White House to do it? Seems like they were actually preventing Americans also from free speech on the platform, even though they said that it's for foreign countries. So let's go around the docket. Maddie, what do you think's going on here, and why is this important?
I'm for them to figure out how to potentially bucket things that they don't like in areas that give them the ability to censor some of the free speech that I think people are arguing, right, is at the root of this Supreme Court ruling. So I'm a little bit bummed from that perspective. But again, these are things that as they play out over time, you trust in the process of democracy, that if the pendulum swings too far one way, hopefully through, lobbying and people standing up and speaking out and continuing to fight back on some of these things that you don't like, we also see the pendulum swing back, as we're seeing in a lot of areas that swung really far left over the course of the last few years post-COVID. We're starting to see through policy, through polling, through some of these things of people standing back up and pushing back, that it's starting to swing back a little bit more in the middle, or maybe a little bit further on the right. So you got to trust in the process of democracy, but I think this is a wrong ruling from the Supreme Court. I'm not a fan of it.
Mikey, why do you think they're doing it? Didn't they learn the first time?
Oh, well, doing it, meaning getting in the middle of it, or?
Yeah.
This is interesting because, I'm with Maddie in the sense that I don't think at the end of the day that the government should have the ability to tell companies what to do and not do. But I think, I'm obviously not a legal scholar here, but this is just allowing the White House to contact agencies. So it's not, this isn't necessarily saying that the White House has authority to tell them what they can and cannot say. It's allowing them to reach out, because there was literally a block with them contacting them. So I'm kind of in the middle on this. And I think the real bigger issue here is the evolution of us as a society, because freedom of the press. And again, I'm completely in line with Maddie. I think that the press should have the ability to report on whatever they want, and the government should not be, strong arming people to take this down, say this, don't say that. But at the end of the day, I think our real challenge right now is like the differentiator between like freedom of the press, freedom of speech. I think this is where the real battle is going to lie over the next 10 or 20 years is like, because in this day and age, social media companies, YouTube, these platforms that we're all, casting on, this is the new press. And I think we're just in this weird time right now where, nobody's actually calling it that. But at the end of the day, like who watches CNBC?
Right.
I was just telling Dylan this the other day, like I get a lot of my news from certain podcasts. I don't really watch the news. I do still read like Bloomberg or whatever. But at the end of the day, I think that's the real challenge that we're facing over the next, 5, 10, 20 years is like, what does freedom of the press really actually mean? And I don't know if you guys saw this, but it's it correlates the debate that's coming up, which I was
going to say,
yeah. CNBC or whoever's broadcasting it is telling, CNN. They're basically telling YouTube and all the platforms that you can't stream anything that comes from our platform. And so again, we're in this really interesting time because it's like, back in the day, if a newspaper printed something, then they own the rights to that. There was an Associated Press that you would, subscribe to. And so as long as you were part of the Associated Press, you could re-report that. But if you were not, then you had to come up with your own story around that. And so I think we're just in this weird time right now where, where's these legal lines going to be drawn? And Benjamin Franklin actually said something that I think is interesting, that I think he actually said that he believes that a Continental Congress should be convened I forget the amount of time that he said, but he said, this shouldn't be the only time that we convene a Continental Congress. And I think the reason why he was saying that is because he understood that 400 years from now, things are going to be completely different. And that's a scary proposition because, I'm diehard like Constitution. It was written for a reason, and I'm scared for the Constitution to be changed, but the system allows for that to happen. And so I think we're going to probably see more of this. I don't think this is a slap in the face from the Supreme Court saying, hey, the White House can tell social media companies what they can and can't do. I think it's just allowing them to communicate with them.
Yeah, and I think you're right. That's an important distinction from what I started with, because I think you're right, is that I think maybe the lines were more blurred before, and what they're trying to do is make lines really, really clear here, right? To make sure there's not some wrongdoing and giving a lot of freedom to the platforms. Mooch, what are you thinking?
The scary part of it is that we know that the government is going to strong arm them. So I think that's
right.
Well, that's when you said that, I was like, yeah, they don't have the authority, but it doesn't mean that they won't use their power as the White House to do what they kind of want. And
and when you look at the weaponization of so many other, political institutions within our government and how they have been weaponized, and a lot of the conspiracy theories that have now over time come out to be true, and how they silence certain things, or they, misrepresented something, or they completely debunk something that then they totally, years later admitted to be true. I think it just gives the White House more latitude to put people on notice. And then behind the scenes, they have different tactics and strategies on how they go about doing things. But just like CNN, you brought up that point that I was going to allude to as well, is going, CNN is saying, we want to control the narrative and the truth and the information that is being dispersed through our platform. And therefore nobody else can discern, digest, give their own opinions on that. We want to minimize that chatter. And I think that's what we're starting to see more and more of, whether it's the White House, it's CNN, whatever platforms, Twitter, Instagram, Meta, right? They are saying, if you're going to play in our ecosystem, or you're going to get stuff from our ecosystem, then there's going to be rules and things that you're going to have to abide by, which I think gives them the ability to craft and mold and manipulate sometimes things that they do or don't want to be getting out, and in how those things are getting out.
YouTube is telling its content creators right now, if you want to do this, you need to reach out to CNN and get the rules around it, which where that's coming from. It's coming straight from the White House.
Definitely. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see when we record next week's episode, because the debate's tomorrow. We're recording this one day before the debate.
Ooh, I can't wait.
Yeah, you listeners are listening to us one day after the debate happened. I'd love to kind of go around Mooch, let's start with you. What do you predict for tomorrow? We're going to have a little bit of evidence here, but what do you hope to achieve by the debate? I think, all of us want open conversation, open debate. I don't know if you guys saw Trump on the All In podcast, such a different format than a normal presidential debate. My concern in what CNN is doing, the thing that you guys all alluded to, is that they're going to chop it up, snippet it up in the way that serves them to get clicks and not really help in people understanding the conversation and people's true voice. They're just going to go for clickbait. And I think that's what's so beautiful about YouTube, where people can digest the information, they can process it, they can give feedback, they can give comments, there can be real conversation, discussion. But when you have these media conglomerates who can control the clips and post it and create virality and the excitement of it, you lose sort of that real debate. And if you watch the Trump debate, that podcast with him, he was so tempered, and it's such a different side of the candidate than you see every day. I mean, we don't really see Biden that much anyways. But Mooch, what are you hoping that you see in the debate? Maybe give some of your projections, but just generally, what's the temperament you expect for tomorrow?
Yeah. I want to go into the debate. I want to touch on one thing really quick on what we just talked about with the social media stuff. I don't think it's going to be as dangerous as we think. And I guess it relates to the debate and everything too, because I think when Elon did release the Twitter files, right? And then the recent stuff that came out, I think the government is seeing the backlash. There's always going to be propaganda, right? But they are seeing the backlash of what happened the way that they did it. Right. Like before. And so the article said, like, even after the Supreme Court temporarily lifted the restrictions in October, the administration remained cautious and wasn't in touch with the platforms at all about election related matters. And so I'm really hoping that, like, even though it reopens it, that it doesn't, you need to have some availability. The crappy thing about free speech is you do need to have some ability to censor something. Right. We have to have insurance on our vacant lots, because if somebody beats up somebody else on our vacant lot, we can get sued, right? And if somebody says something on your platform that's used incorrectly, like Instagram, Facebook can be sued. They have to have the ability to censor, right? It just sucks. But it just sucks because the people that are controlling that is hard. And so as we get into the debates, we'll see, what gets censored and what doesn't. And the nice thing about it is, because it is played live, there will be somebody recording it at home and streaming it to get that original cut. And I think what we saw on the All In podcast was Trump acting more like he probably does when he's sitting at the table at the White House, or when he's sitting having business deals with people, which is very different than when he's on the podium rallying a crowd, because that's two different personalities and that's two different things. Like, he's also a showman, and it's different when he's speaking in front of, like, the G8 summits, or, telling, them we're not giving them money anymore. That's a very direct, like, angry, like, I mean business type thing. You think back to, like, Reagan saying Gorbachev shut down the wall, right? Like, that was like a moment, that was a performance, that was like a thing that happens. And so there are a lot of different versions of Trump, and maybe there's different versions of Biden. So I know that one thing that was really interesting 4 years ago.
Were you positively or negatively surprised by that dynamic? Like, did you expect that when you saw it?
The podcast or what? Mm-hmm.
His temperament.
It wasn't really surprising. Like, it's more like, yeah, there's no way someone could, like, because not only was he the president, like, he got elected because of his wildness, but he was successful as a president, and there's no way he could have been successful with the economy. Like, we're just not going to see the stuff that happens behind closed doors. And so it made sense and went, yeah, like, that's what you would expect from a CEO doing these interviews. Right. And so it's 4 years ago when they did the debate, the shocking thing was Biden held his own against him, and we couldn't believe it. We're like, this guy is so old, can barely talk, can barely walk. And Biden held his own against him. So the sad thing is, like, where's the bar set? Like, Biden needs to be able to not stare off into space and have a normal conversation, and it will say he won the debate. Right. because because what everybody's saying right now is like they're showing the videos of like Biden being on stage at a rally and like staring off into space for like 30 seconds and then somebody has to grab him. Right. He just has to not do that. And the Biden supporters will stay with him. Right. Because that's the propaganda from the
Is he going to is the question.
Is he going? So like, that's what all I'm paying attention to. Right. Like will he stare? But the shocking thing is I think he'll probably actually perform pretty well. Because whatever they're doing to like give him drugs behind the scene, to give him energy to whatever, 4 years ago, he came out cracking in that debate and I couldn't believe it. And so we see him when he's struggling. We see him when he's not. I think that he's probably going to show up and do okay. And as a result of being okay, he's going to be rated to win. That the bar set so low. And his big thing, he'll be trying to get Trump to say something crazy that's a soundbite. And Trump's going to come out swinging. For sure. I remember when he told Hillary, like, well, you're going to jail. As soon as I get elected, you're getting sent to prison. He will say stuff like that. And I am excited to see people's reaction to that.
It's going to be, I haven't been this excited for a presidential debate ever, to be honest. I do think it's very interesting that Trump is going out on, Dr. Phil's podcast and the Nelk Boys and,
he's doing a lot of podcasts, huh, Manny?
But he's, as you mentioned, the very aggressive, boisterous, in your face Trump that we've all, learned is his style over, the last 8 years. I feel like I don't know. It just seems like there's a little bit of a different calm about him that I haven't seen before. And, Joe Biden, they pulled him off the campaign trail or whatever you want to call it for 7 days to Camp David. They said he's doing debate prep, no press briefings, no media appearances, no questions, no nothing. And so I think he's going to have to do a lot more than just not stare off into the distance. I think he has way more to lose. And Vivek said this in a soundbite that I watched maybe a day or two ago. The DNC convention is in August. This is the first time they've ever done a presidential debate before that big convention.
Both candidates are elected, actually.
And so what that's a trip. In his opinion, says
that's a trip.
Is that this is their final test to see whether or not they need to swap somebody in last minute because the bar is already set so low. And so what is the entire world going to be watching for? Well, I think at least if you're somebody that you're like, I hate Trump, I don't want to support for him, I'm a never Trumper. But what I'm seeing over there, I don't know if I can vote for that. So I might be considering voting for Trump, right? I think there's a lot of people that fall into that category. And so what I think people are watching during this debate is, will Joe Biden have his senior moment, right? Slurs words, mumble, say whatever he says, lose his train of thought. Can Joe Biden pass the eye test? Can he just stand up there and look like a president? Will voters really trust that this 81-year-old president of the United States has another 4 good years in front of him based on what they're seeing? And how can Joe Biden defend, because Trump and his team are going to have receipts. So how can he defend letting in 10 million illegals into the country in 3.5 years and seeing what has happened with a lot of the crime that has come with that? Can he credibly explain that his White House has nothing to do with the lawfare that many people, obvious as day, are saying is lawfare against Donald Trump? Can he justify, right, the worst inflation since Jimmy Carter, the terrible pullouts of Afghanistan, the war in Israel, the war in Ukraine, right? The world is ultimately, he said Donald Trump is going to get us into all these wars, and yet he now has the track record of doing these things. What's his explanation for that? And, his best defense might simply be that he's just got low expectations. But that being said, I think he has more pressure on him in this debate than any other one. And I think it'll be very telling whether or not they're going to swap somebody out for him. And my guess is he's not going to do well. I don't think the drugs are going to do anything to him. I love that Trump said, I want a drug test and I'll happily take one myself.
Yeah, that's good.
They got the mic. They got the mic. We can turn your mic off. But here's one thing that Trump did win with his camp was there is going to be no teleprompters and no cue cards. And we all know what happens to Joe Biden when there ain't no teleprompters or cue cards. Even when there is, he can't get it right. So this is going to be really interesting if you're somebody that cares about the upcoming debate.
And Trump won the coin toss, which means he has last word. Mm-hmm. Mikey, what are you predicting tomorrow? What's important for us to look at? Are you concerned, or you think it's interesting that maybe Biden is not on a podcast tour? Is that the right approach to reach the American people? Do you even think he's capable of that? Touch on that too.
I think it's definitely the right approach. I just don't think he's capable. I mean, I think we're living in a day and age where it's been proven that's the right way path to do it now. Maddie covered the majority of what I was going to say. I would just venture. There's a part of me that hopes that Joe Biden is cognizant, because I would think that the Trump camp right now has two different versions of a debate. If this guy shows up lost, senile, don't be too hard on him. And I think you're going to see a Trump that was more like, as Maddie was saying, the backdoor Trump, the behind closed doors Trump. But I want to see the Trump. I want to see the other Trump.
You want the fireworks?
I want to see the fireworks. And I think the only way that happens is if Biden is coherent and then Trump comes after him.
Yeah.
But I think if Biden comes out on that stage and is pretty loopy, then Biden does himself in. And I don't think Trump has to get too crazy or aggressive. That might be kind of boring. I kind of want to see the Biden be coherent and Trump come at him. Because, as Aaron said, I think Trump he's a showman. And I love what you said, Aaron. There's no way that Trump got to where he is and did the types. I sat at a dinner with George Ross, his attorney, one time in Dallas, and got to spend time with George Ross and just hear the stories about Trump and who Trump really is. And this was before Trump was the president. I think he was still on The Apprentice at that point in time. And just hearing that version of Trump, and to Aaron's point, there's no way that you get to where Trump is by being a lunatic, as sometimes we think he is. And so, even back to what you were saying, Ashish, the Trump that you see on the All In podcast, I think is the statesman. And I think that's generally who he is. I think the crazy version of him that we see is not, it's to Aaron's point, a showman, but I kind of like seeing it. And I don't think we're going to see it if Biden is out of it.
It's a good point of what you just made me think about. So if Biden comes out and he's out of it, and Trump stays on the offensive, I think that actually hurts Trump a little bit. And I hadn't really thought about that, because he'll look like he's bullying
he's
some
a meanie,
guy, right? So there's a weird strategy that could play out that I haven't even thought of would be that.
But I think it's what's interesting by watching the All In podcast was you could see how measured Trump was there. He admitted, I'm not undermining him. I'm not going to underestimate him. I think I saw a side of Trump that maybe I've never seen before, which is almost a more humble man, if that makes any sense. I don't know if you guys saw a couple weeks ago, maybe we've talked about it here. Yeah. Do you remember a couple of weeks ago, he showed up to the UFC and the UFC just went insane. It was right after the whole trial thing. You finish the debate and you get Trump on a Joe Rogan podcast, party's over.
Every UFC I've gone to that Trump's been at, standing ovations. I'm
telling you, man.
Everybody, I've been to two where he walks into the room and people celebrate there's no way more than they do for the main fight, right? People celebrate and jump up and down for Trump way more than they celebrate for a knockout. It's crazy.
I'm predicting that Joe Rogan has Donald Trump on in the next couple of months. He's just waiting for the first debate.
I could see that. I'd love to see Joe Rogan have both of them on.
I was going to say that would be really cool too. I mean, can you imagine him as a mediator, having them both sit there and having a 3 or 4 hour conversation?
The future
can you imagine?
Debate will be Joe Rogan as the moderator. Are you kidding me?
They've joked around about that multiple times. I could totally see it. I still think it's crazy think that the dude that is going to be debating Donald Trump was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial. So if that doesn't, tell you how much they're trying to protect this guy, I just don't think you can hide them any longer. I mean, they've tried
So
to hide
fun.
them and protect them and gatekeep them for so long, and that time is over. We are front and center on the campaign trail, and you can't hide it if you're going to try and win in a very scrutinized, election like we're going to see this November.
All right, well, let's keep going. We could talk about this a lot. Lots of fun activities. We'll definitely process the results of the debate next week on our episode. But there you go, guys. You're going to hear our predictions after you've seen it, and we'll process the results next week. Let's talk about home sales. New home sales are down by 11%, just shy of the expectation. I was pretty surprised about this. I didn't realize that it was that significant. I have my own personal experience of some real estate stuff going on in Orange County, California. But Maddie, Mooch, what do you think's going on here? Why is this concerning? Is this important?
Is our article video?
There's a video. I don't know if you guys want to play it or not. It's kind of a minute and a half video that we could clip it a little bit, but
there's a lot of data reports that have come out too, Mooch, if you're looking for something that isn't the video. But I'm excited to hear your thoughts on this, because I think this is data that supports a rate cut, baby.
Yeah.
And I know you've been holding out for no rate cuts, or at least not holding out for no rate cuts, but you've been of the camp that they're not going to cut rates this year.
On it, for sure.
And I think this is, with the bad data being good news for a rate cut, this is another one, and probably the hottest pillar of inflation in PCE that has been, propping up the Fed to maybe hold longer, that we're starting to see home sales plateau. We're seeing inventory tick up a little bit. We're seeing the bad news be good news on that front. And so I think this is one. We've got consumer sentiment that has, dropped. We've got retail sales that are slowing down. We've got savings, personal savings, lower than pre-pandemic levels in 2019. So expendable cash is starting to dry up. So I think a lot of what the Fed has been fighting against and the policies they've enacted are starting to show up. They've already shown up with, CPI and PPI. That being said, I think the one area that they were really struggling to get under wraps, and we even talked about it on the show many times, is, does it really matter? Do they care that much about real estate? I think they do, because they've held it, rates as long as they have. And I think if we completely removed housing from, the Fed's radar, they probably would have explored maybe cutting rates a little bit sooner. But I do think this does set up, and a lot of economists are now starting to get on that train, and the futures probabilities of a September rate cut have significantly jumped upon this report.
When we talked about it like 3 months ago, that was when everybody did predictions, right? I said hold. And Matt, did you say it would lower by the end of the year? We did it a few months ago.
Yep, I've been of the camp we're going to cut for sure. In 24.
I had a buddy the other day telling me all the reasons why there was going to be rate cuts. But all of them were really desperately because he needed one, and not to be unfair. It's just like he was so much. He's like, they have to do something, or there's going to be so many commercial properties that get foreclosed on, or they have to be.
Yeah.
And I do believe in government intervention. And there's another article about some government intervention that's going to be happening. Something interesting about that article, though. So when it says new home sales drop, it's volume, right? So the number of homes that sold went down. The median home price still went up last month, right? So month over month, the price of homes went up. So what are they looking at when they're talking about inflation and economics? Like the number of homes sold, because that's an economy thing, right? And so if the number of homes sold is less, then less people are making money, less contractors, less everybody makes money. But then there's also that true inflation trigger of the cost of housing. Now, if they want to reduce the cost of housing, then now is the time for them to hold. But the other crazy part, too, though, is mortgage lenders, they can decide to lower rates to generate volume and just make less of a spread. So I do actually think that based on this data, our 30-year mortgage in the next month is going to go down. And maybe the lowest we're going to see it this year, 2024. So I would say look at mortgage rates over the next 3 to 4 weeks. And we're probably going to hit a bottom for 2024. based on this data, because some lenders are going to see their volume is down and they're going to create some incentives and lower some incoming rates. They're going to lower their profit margins in order to get volume because they're going to be worried about volume. So that's one wild, big prediction that we'll look back and see. But I don't think the Fed, it'll be interesting, right? We're halfway through the year, so still a lot can happen. We're only halfway through the year. And so at today, I would say they're still not going to do the cut because it's probably doing exactly what they want. If they see median home sales decrease month over month, year over year, or they see it hold steady for like 2-3 months in a row, then they'll do that. By volume going down, that's the only thing. Like, this has to happen first, right? The number of transactions has to dramatically reduce in order for the median sales price to also reduce next. So that's the first step, right? And if we get 2 more months of year over year declines, as we're heading into the hottest months of the year, it is unique too that it did happen now, right? Because this is when it's supposed to be strong. So that would lead to, but I would say we're 60 to 90 days away from having median home sales stay normal. So if our volume stays like this the next 2 months, where it's down year over year, then we're probably going to see median home prices stay. We saw the news article. I don't know if you guys saw the news article. Like was it Argentina had their first week ever of no inflation. Part of me goes like, how easy is it going to be to like juice the numbers if you're only tracking week over week? But still, it's the first time it's ever happened, and it's based on that. So like if we get a month where there's like, hey, 1 month no inflation on housing, because housing is so important, we'll see. So I think it's important to distinguish the two. I think that there is some things that will happen. It does increase the chances of a Fed cut by the end of the year. And the reason it does to me is because it increases the chances that 90 days from now, median home prices stay the same month over month on a national level. And that hasn't happened for a while.
So let me add a little more context to some of your points, because I agree with some of what you're saying. So Case-Shiller, to your point, just came out this week, the National Housing Price Index, and it's up 6.3% year over year in April. So from April to April. However, another data report just came out this week that we have median new home sales prices are down to 417,000, which is the lowest since April of 2023. And the existing home sales price is 419,000. So the median new home sales price is actually lower than the existing home sales price, which is showing that builders are being able to deliver a little bit more product at a more cost-effective rate. That being said, based on the National Builders Association, the U.S. needs to build 2 million houses to revive the American dream of home ownership, and that we're at a shortage of 2.2 million homes in the housing market, which keeps us in that really highly unaffordable range. So I think there's a lot of conflicting and interesting data here. That being said, I think what a lot of the Fed has noted they want to see in terms of trends, the data is starting to support that, even though I think the arguments that you're making, Aaron, make sense, right? That, houses and affordability are still a major issue. I think some of those data points that tie into this overall unaffordable conversation are starting to build in a way that are going to hopefully start trending things back in a direction that makes the Fed feel a little bit more confident, going in with a rate cut in September.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting too, and I'll as it goes around, I've got an article or a graph that I want to pull up too. It's just the thought of, so let's say next month mortgage lenders do lower their rate because they need volume. Right? It doesn't matter to the Fed. They just decrease their spread. We're going to see volume tick right back up. And so it's like this. It is so hard to create median home sale price declines. The builders are the most interesting about it, because what a builder can do is they can change their spec level. Right? They can absolutely put in cheaper fixtures, cheaper things, and control the market. They're the fastest ones that can do it. So, but yeah. I guess Mikey's probably next on the opinion for it.
Well, Mikey, talk about the FHA thing too. Build that into your conversation. Yeah.
Let me share this. It's interesting. Like I'm in the camp. I don't envy the Fed. And it's hard to really look because I think, you know, sometimes, and we've talked about this for almost a year now, as real estate investors, like our primary focus is real estate, but there's so many other things. And when you look at this chart, even though, you know, housing prices have dipped, and this was just quarter 1, so we're not seeing quarter 3, which Case-Shiller is kind of a lagging indicator anyway. But when you look at this, yeah, houses are dipping, but compared to what? Look at this.
Totally.
Like,
man.
this is
crazy.
insanity.
Wow. Yeah.
It's insanity.
And just back to what, you know, look at this. I mean, houses, boom, 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 but you've never seen anything like this. And so, you know, this is why I'm constantly like saying we're in this weird time. And to sum up my thoughts, because I don't need to reiterate, I feel a little bit schizophrenic sometimes. But Aaron made a really good point that I constantly keep coming back to. By the way, I got a text from my realtor the night before last, and he said, "Hey, I think we should have a phone call because I have my house listed and it's been listed forever." And Kara and I were already marching down this road, but we get on a call with our realtors. There's 2 of them. And they're like, "What are you guys thinking?" And I said, "I want to know what you're thinking. You're the experts." I already knew what I was thinking. And he said, "I think we should pull your house off the market." He's like, "There is just nothing happening. And I know you guys are getting tired of showing your house. And if you really want to sell this house, you need to drop the price, and you're not willing to do that." And like, how much of that is going on? And sure, there's people that are potentially in trouble that, you know, need to drop their house by 15, 20%. But that's not a commonality now, especially with all the low interest rates that are out there. And anyway, Aaron's key point that I just keep thinking about in the back of my brain, and I mentioned this a few weeks ago, there's a building across from us that if Kara and I sell our house, we're thinking about moving into a condo. And I mentioned this on a previous episode. It opened in September and it's almost 70% occupied. And the guy told us that like 90% of it, 90% plus, is people from out of state and out of country. Because I was like, are people like moving from their house like into downtown? And he said, no, it's people coming from out of town, the tech companies and all of this. And I started thinking about that and like, why would you buy a house right now? Because if everybody is as confused as we are, like, why would you buy a house? Interest rates are high. Housing prices are high. I think the average American thinks that, oh, interest rates are going to come down, which means housing prices are going to come down. No, they're not.
No, they're not.
This was like Aaron's key point that like, if I just had to sum up one, yeah, I agree with that. You drop interest rates, and this is the Fed's like, again, I don't envy the Fed, but you drop interest rates even more than a little bit, and there's going to be a buying frenzy, which is going to take this housing chart.
It's going to keep going.
And it's just going to continue to skyrocket it. So I don't have a logical answer around this other than it's bad.
Let me add on to that. And Mooch, I want you to comment on both of our comments here. Okay. Similar example in Orange County, 5 or 6 years ago, and I'm going to speak in California terms because I don't know Texas that well, but even in Sacramento, Maddie, you and I can probably attest to this, right? New home development was selling for $400 to $500 a foot. Okay. I just had a recent person come and give me an all cash offer for my house for $900 a foot. Okay. The problem was that I have nowhere else to go. So if I go buy a new homes in Irvine, a brand new, let's say 3,000 to 4,000 square foot home, track homes we're talking about. And if you don't know, or Irvine or Orange County or even Sacramento, it's sort of becoming like this Pleasantville of suburbia. So you got track homes and track hundreds and hundreds of homes, brand new developments. All these big home developers are building all these beautiful single family detached homes. They're selling them for $1,200 a foot. Okay. So my question is that based on the dynamic that Mike and Mooch just said, which we all agree, it makes common sense, supply and demand. Interest rates go down, prices go up. What the hell is the end of this? This is insane. You're telling me that in America, in suburbia, residential single family detached homes that are track homes are going to be selling for $1,500, $1,600, $1,800 a foot in a few years? Where's the end of this? This is insane. And we're not talking about the middle of America. We're not talking, like for all intents and purposes, Texas has a lot of land, a lot of space. California doesn't. And at what point does this I mean, maybe we're short-sighted in saying this is cheap. She's $1,200 a foot is cheap. 5 years from now, it's going to be $1,800. It's like, shit, we should have bought it, right? So, but you can't move out. You have property tax readjustment on a new basis. Your mortgage now becomes unaffordable, even if you take out the cash. So I think that's why you're also seeing residential sales go down, because even if you can sell your house and make money, you don't have options. Your cost goes up. You're buying at prices that are almost insane. So do we just ignore all that? It's like, look, the dynamics exist. Don't be short-sighted. Suck it up, figure it out, get in, because $1,000, $1,200, it's cheap. Tell me, Mooch, what do you think?
Yeah, it's like like owning real estate in New York or London, something like that. There is no stopping it. The weirdest thing we have is we have that 4 or 5 year period of absolutely below average interest rates, and then we have a 2 year period that was crazy. And that 2 year period, but we should try to figure out what the data is, like how many people truly got loans between 2019 and 2022. Whether it's 3% of the market, 5% of the market, 20% of the market, who knows? But like, it would be great to figure out that number, because that number will impact like how deep and how long this will go. Because what's your solution, Ash? If you want to move, your solution is you rent the house you're in and you go rent a new one. I have a house a mile from here. I've got a $2.8 million loan on it that's 3% or something. It's like 2.5 or 3.5, whatever it is. My payment is tiny for that thing. And if I sold it today, I want to say my payment's 10 grand. Let's say it's 10 to 12 grand a month. If I sold it today, whoever buys it, their payment's going to be $35,000 a month compared to my 12.
Right.
Right. And if I go buy another one, it's going to be 35,000. So yes, I will own that house forever. I'll never sell that thing unless I go broke and I'm filing bankruptcy and I need to take the equity out of it. It would be a stupid decision to ever sell that property. So if I don't want to live there, my only option is like buy a new one. Now you could buy a new one and now your $30,000 payment is kind of hedged because you have one super low payment, one high. So you could say, all right, both my houses are like $20,000 a piece at this point and I rent one out or not. Like you could hedge it that way. Or you just rent out the other one for $15,000 a month and then you rent a new one for $15,000 a month, because rents are not up, just purchase payments are. I want to share a sheet really quick that I think is just fascinating. Redfin Data Center, great place for you guys to go get statistics, get to see things like this. So this is median housing prices over time, right? Redfin Data Center, you could do it by city, you can do it by nationwide. So the other thing we should mention to everybody out there is real estate is very local and you may live in a different market. And so plug it into Redfin Data Center. They got all the markets in the country. So we do seasonally adjusted median rate, right? Ash says, when will it end? Look at this. Forever, from 2012 to 2021, which was just a completely normal time. This is a nice, solid, seasonally adjusted median home price thing. And then for 1 month, or like 2 months during 2020, when we all thought the world was going to end, we fire sold everything and we had a drop. And then it went up like firecracker. And then we had a little bit of an adjustment after that rate. But now look, it's like the world has already adjusted to that rate. And so like, this is a nice, healthy path. It matches a lot like it was for the prior 20 years, right? So like, that's what it's going to be. Like, are we going to drop and correct back down? Maybe, but this tells me it's like par for the course. You can check all sorts of things on here, like new listings. So like new listings are way down, right? So what's that going to do to inventory? Inventory is going to stay down. Check this out. Inventory, the number of houses on the market, still half of what it was in 2020, like a third of what it was in 2015. And as inventory stays down, prices go up. It's just such conflicting thing. Interest rates and price of housing are so conflicting, and they have to say what's more important. And the vast majority of people are renters. And so like, what does the world need? What does the market need? It's more going to be based on that months of supply also. So like, other than our little 3 year gap of COVID weirdness, lowest it's ever been, right? Like lowest it's ever been other than our 3 year gap. So housing is strong. And
Fascinating.
I wish it wasn't.
Mikey, is that why you think FHFA is doing what they're doing?
Yeah. So we've probably talked about this before, but there's other solutions to this because everybody's in a conundrum. Our entire society is based off of debt. We shared that spoof video, a few weeks back about creating I forget what he called it.
That was fun.
A debt shop, right? This is like this problem has created where we're at today. If people don't keep borrowing, then the economy as a whole suffers, including the government. And again, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but the government needs to sell more bonds in order to print more debt, which means that the interest rate has to be attractive. So they're just walking a fine line across the board. But one of the solutions to keeping people engaged is 40-year mortgages. And if you can't get houses to move, then you see things like this, which I don't need to spend a lot of time on this, but this is literally off the Federal Housing Finance Agency's website. FHFA announces conditional approval of Freddie Mac pilot to purchase second mortgages. So they're literally talking right now. And again, this is a pilot program. By the way, when Aaron said earlier his payment is cheap, cheap is relative. This is a very small program, only $2.5 billion. So which is small in comparison to what the government spends. But the fact that they're getting ready to launch a test pilot program to back $2.5 billion of purchases. And there's some stipulations. I mean, it's a maximum loan amount of $78,000. But if the government is getting into backing second mortgages in a pilot program, it just gives you some indications on what the future is. Number one, Aaron said this earlier, but they're convinced housing prices are going to continue to go up. Go look at Fannie Mae's projections on housing. They think that it's going to continue to go up. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to kind of read all the things. The problem is when we get focused on one sector, one problem, that's where, I get a little bit tunnel vision. But the fact that they're doing second mortgages just kind of shows you, number one, what's to come. Because if they're doing a $2.5 billion test program with a cap of 78,000, pretty soon it's going to be $1 trillion program with a cap of 200,000. And why are they doing this? Because they need to incentivize people to keep borrowing. That's the only way that the whole freaking fake money, fractional reserve banking system even works. This is the part we've probably talked about before, but longer mortgages. That's the only way that they're going to be able to bring affordability down, because everything we've been talking about, I don't think anybody in here believes that housing prices are coming down unless we have some kind of crazy when Aaron shows those little dips, it's what happened. It was 2008, it was 2015, it was 2021. Unless we have some kind of crazy, we might see a dip, but unless we have something crazy, you're not going to see housing prices come down over a long period of time. Long meaning more than, a 6-month period. And if that's the case, then even what I was saying about this building across the street, if you lower interest rates or housing prices come down and the Federal Reserve tries to force housing prices down in any way, what's going to happen? All these people that are in a condo across the street, you can literally pick your mortgage terms right now, like 6 months, not mortgage, you can do that too, but your lease terms in these buildings, all these people that are in 6-month leases, if housing prices come down at all and interest rates come down, you're going to see an outflux of renters that are just waiting to see what's happening for a year. And those housing prices are just going to skyrocket. So what is the solution? The government's going to have to figure out how to lend to us longer, mortgage till engage till death, lend to us longer so that the prices are affordable. Because this is the thing that all of us practically think of at the end of the day is at what point in time is this just completely unaffordable? And Aaron brought this up. I mean, rents haven't creeped up yet, but that always washes out, a couple of years later. And as housing prices and multifamily prices and everything goes up, eventually the rents have to come up too. And where that crosses and where people actually jump in is it's going to have to be the government creating programs like this to say, hey, keep borrowing money.
Well, to your point there, Grant Cardone, and of course, we know a lot of his antics are just to get, clicks and eyeballs on his stuff. But he even said, over the next decade, we're going to see rents double. And when you look at a lot of the economics behind his argument, he's got a relatively good point. And to your point, Aaron, going back earlier, I'd be curious to know how many, mortgages are sub 6, 5, 4%. So this was a report that came out from Redfin in 2024 in February. 89% of borrowers have an interest rate below 6%. Over 78% of borrowers have a rate below 5%. 59.5% have a rate below 4%. And those lucky enough to have an interest rate below 3% are at 22.6%.
Dude, under 5 is the one to be scared about.
So under 5 is 78%.
We'll never be under 5 in the next 10 or 15 years.
So when you think about that, right, is how many people are going to list their home in
under 4,
the current climate and or economic dynamics that you have to take into account if you're going to sell out of an asset, and all of the taxes and then all of the new costs of capital to get into something else. And what is that going to cost you? Most people are not going to sell their home unless they are absolutely in dire straits, in a distressed situation, and they need the capital, and that is their last bargaining chip, which is the equity in their home. We're just not going to see that level of inventory. And then when you look at what just came out earlier this week, single family housing starts are slightly down year over year. Multifamily starts in May are down 50%.
That makes sense.
When you think about the amount of units that are going to be delivered, there's no way we're going to continue to catch up. The deficit is probably going to continue to increase. So this affordability challenge that the US and the Fed has to navigate is a good argument for what you're saying, Aaron, them keeping rates higher longer. But then at the same time, they got to find ways to incentivize the delivery of more housing units and the availability to those housing units. So if the cost of capital to build, well, why are housing permits down? Why is construction slowing? The cost of capital and the margins for these investors and these developers are saying, we gotta slow down, or we gotta put a pause on this thing right now because we're doing all of this work to make practically nothing. The economics don't make sense. And until the engineering of those economics do make sense, where the cost of capital to, build more housing and or to get that housing filled, I think that it's going to be a really challenging time for builders. It's going to be a challenging time for borrowers and buyers. And that's where we're seeing this slowdown in data. I think we're at a 4 or 5 year low in transactional volume right now. It's looking very similar to what was seen in the 80s, where interest rates, I think, were at 12 or 13% for an 18-month period, and things just it was maybe 25% of the volume was actually taking place. So until they can make the economics make sense for delivering more housing, and or municipalities and governments are incentivizing development instead of creating more red tape and barriers to get through those things, they're not going to solve that problem. And I don't know if they do want to solve that problem. That's another question to, be thinking about. And obviously, to your point, Mike, right? Does that just create more of a window for the government incentivizing new programs and people getting on the tit of the government and locking us into this machine, this wheel that we've been spinning? It just might have a few different cogs in it in a way that we haven't seen in past decades.
Renter Nation. That's such good info, Maddie. The fact that you're able to dig up that stuff is wild to actually comprehend some of those numbers. And it's like, I need a lot of time to actually decompress. We could have a long conversation about what that really means and really brainstorm what does the future of housing really mean. That many people are locked in.
And that doesn't even include, remember, like 6 months ago, we talked about a chart that showed how many people own their house free and clear.
Yeah.
That doesn't even factor that in.
It's like if someone wants to invest in housing, and the moral of the story is, if you have cash and you want to buy a house today and you buy that house, in 5 years, it's going to be worth more. In 10 years, it's going to be worth more. In 20 years, it's going to be worth more. That's it. Right. So people will do that. right? But they can also get a lot of just by putting money in the bank because the rate's so high. And so it's just a rents. So essentially they could buy a house cash, rents can return 5 to 6% a year. And in 10 years, they can sell the thing for a 30% bump, and it's a good long-term investment. Sounds like incentive for hedge funds to be the ones that come in and buy again, and they're still sitting.
That's why we've seen so much volume from hedge funds over the last couple quarters.
They're the only buyer. They're the only people it makes sense for. Cash buyers are the ones that'll buy right now. That's it.
Well, and they're buying at prices just like, back in 2010, 11, 12, 13, when people are like, what is Invitation Homes and Blackstone doing, paying this price for this home? When they were looking at a macro picture, they were looking at the data, and they were saying, yeah, we're buying at this price because we know when we get to this place on the timeline and where the chart's going to be at, we're going to be way up here. Right. So we're fine paying those numbers. And I keep seeing a couple reports exactly. Yeah, we're on that, upward swing. And I keep seeing, foreclosures are on the rise again, or this is the beginning of the housing crash. I laugh at that, right? Because one, when we see foreclosure filings on an uptick, you got to make sure you're looking at the chart of what data point are we talking about an uptick from, and what is that in relative to at when the peak level of foreclosures was. We're at the bottom of the barrel. And as of yesterday, the Mortgage Bankers Association just put out their monthly loan monitoring survey, and it revealed that the total number of loans now in forbearance, which is loans that were in distress, they couldn't make their payments, they were going to the bank and saying, hey, can you help me work something out in the short term? Those loans in forbearance have declined again as of May 31st. And there is only 105,000 homeowners in the entire United States that are in forbearance plans. So that is something that, again, when you think about, is there any cracks or distress really being shown in the housing market? From my perspective, very few, if any at all.
We just want to keep talking about houses. I'm just kidding.
Okay, let's move on. Yeah, so we talked a lot about politics today. We talked a lot about housing. I think there's a lot to keep going there. I don't know if you guys saw this viral video of this 7'3" child. I thought we'd just make it a little more fun. Listeners, we talked about a lot of serious topics today, but somebody pull this article up. Tim, I don't know if you can do it or one of the guys. Yeah, share it screen, dude. Like, click this video. Look at this video of
straight domination.
This is like a basketball tournament in Asia. It's like all these European or this Southeast Asian countries. The next Yao Ming, this girl is 7'3", and I just want you guys to watch this video of her playing. It's not even fair. It's like this big, straight domination. This girl is just basically standing there. She's like 4 inches from the basket. You got all these short little Asian girls like scrapping at her. It's just the funniest thing. And I thought it'd be fun to talk about this because we did talk about Caitlin Clark a couple weeks ago. And speaking of which, Caitlin Clark played a game last weekend, which was the highest ticket price women's basketball game ever. I think they were selling tickets at a WNBA game for $9,000 a ticket.
Can you just pull up that picture really quick that had her standing next to everybody? I don't mean to bring this back to housing, but yeah, that looks like the housing chart. That's all I see.
I mean, she's literally like 2.5, 3 feet taller than everybody.
That's insane that she's Chinese.
That's what I'm telling you, man. And also she's not getting any shorter. So great episode. Another stimulating episode of the King's Table podcast. I'm your host, Ashish Nathu. Of course, my friends, Mike Ayala, the sage, the trend spotter, Aaron Amuchastegui, and the hero of hospitality, the girl dad leader himself, daddy number 3, Mr. Matty Aitchison. Thanks so much for listening to the King's Table podcast.